Hi, my name is Tina, also known as Bloomingknitter, and this is Knitting Blooms, episode number 109.
Have you seen the new Twisted Lights from Barmaids? Twisted Lights are the most incredible beeswax candle with a very long burn time. For example, the smaller of the Twisted Lights burns for approximately 20 hours. But that's not what sets it apart from other candles. Twisted Lights look exactly like small balls of yarn. They look so much like a ball of yarn, it almost looks like somebody took a ball of yarn and dipped it in wax. And just like balls of yarn, Twisted Lights comes in lots of amazing colors, and they are 100% beeswax. Barmaids does not use any additives or hardeners in their candles, nor do they coat their molds with toxic mold release. You can get your Twisted Light candles at www.bar-maids.com.
Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm so happy you decided to spend your time with me. In this episode, I'm going to answer a question that was posted on the group. I recently set up a thread for you to ask me questions that you'd like to have the answer to all about me. So this episode is going to consist of the answer to that first question. So I hope you enjoy the show. And now for your questions. This week's question was asked by Amanda B. And she asks, what or who got me started knitting and spinning? So I will start with the knitting. There's stories to everything. So I got started knitting. Well, let's go back. I learned how to knit when I was probably somewhere between 8 and 15. And I learned from my mother and my grandmother. And I probably did knit things when I was that age. However, I don't remember ever finishing anything, or maybe it was just squares or something like that. I could have knit squares for like a charity blanket. I'm really not sure. I don't really remember. I know that I did a lot of crafting with my grandmother, and my mom was always very crafty. And I did learn how to knit when I was young. I mostly crocheted when I was young because I knew how to crochet too. They also taught me how to crochet. But I did do some knitting as well. And then in my early 20s, I thought about picking up knitting again. I had not really done any knitting for quite a while, and something struck my fancy, and I decided I wanted to start knitting. And so, I'd go to Michael's or whatever and buy yarn and try and knit a sweater. I think at that time, in my early 20s, I did complete a sweater in some god-awful acrylic yarn. And I think it just ended up not fitting because we all know when we first start knitting, we think, I don't have to do a gauge. I'll just knit. Well, I think the sweater didn't fit, and I didn't really like the yarn. It was acrylic, and I didn't know better at that time. And I think after I finished that sweater, I started a sweater for my my then husband. Actually, I don't think he was my husband at the time. I don't remember. Anyway, I started a sweater, and he was 6'3" with extremely long arms, and I had to knit this extra large or something sweater. And I decided I wanted to do cables and all of this, and it was this big cabley goodness sweater. Needless to say, the sweater never got finished. Again, it was in acrylic because that's all I knew. And also, when I would knit on it with my friends who were in their early 20s, 22, 23, years old, none of my other friends knit. And they would all be playing cards and drinking, and that just wasn't my scene. So I would be sitting kind of at the corner of the table, participating in conversation and whatnot, but knitting. And I sort of kind of got out of the habit of knitting because none of my friends did, and they all just kept telling me how, oh, look at the granny over there in the corner, she's knitting, and, I didn't have any knitting friends. So I kind of lost interest with knitting. And then when I really started to knit was back in 2006. A friend of mine who used to do scrapbooking with me and stamping and whatnot, she and I went to a knitting retreat with a few other friends as well. And really, at the time, I didn't want to attend this knitting retreat because the week before, I lost a very dear cat of mine. And it was a very difficult time for me. And it happened, I think, I think it was about a week or a little over a week that it had been since he had passed away. And he was a very special cat to me. And it hurt a lot when he passed away. And I did not want to go to this retreat with them. And I was like, no, I don't care if I don't get my money back. I don't want to go. But they insisted that I go. They thought that I needed to get out of the house and do something fun. So they told me, we're picking you up. You better have your stuff ready because if you don't, we're taking you anyway. And they did. They came and picked me up, and the whole way up there, I was like, I don't want to be here. I just want to go home. I'm just going to stay in the room all day and not participate. Well, once I got there, it was very nice. It was very nice to get away and enjoy the time with my friends. And during this retreat, where we are stamping and scrapbooking, a couple of the ladies were knitting. And I had not knit in years and hadn't even thought about it. And my friend was like, oh, I want to learn how to knit. I've always wanted to learn how to knit. And I look at her and I'm like, well, I could have taught you how to knit. I know how to knit. And, but that weekend, the girls that were knitting there went out and bought yarn for my friend Janice. And they came back and we taught her how to cast on and start knitting, and so that weekend we taught her how to knit. And then after that weekend, when we came home on Sunday, I was so rejuvenated into learning how to knit or just getting back into knitting that I went out to Michael's and I bought yarn for a sweater, a bulky sweater. I think it was Woolly's Chunky. And I came home and I proceeded to knit a sweater in a week. And I was just so excited about getting back into knitting and having a knitting friend and all of that. So we started to knit together. Instead of scrapbooking and stamping, we did a lot of knitting together. And slowly over time, we basically converted all of our stamping friends to knitting friends. And now I have a bunch of knitting friends. And then in 2007, when Ravelry came out, and I joined Ravelry, and now I have hundreds and thousands of knitting friends, and it's fabulous. And I don't think that I ever would have stuck with knitting had I not had Ravelry or that avenue to find new knitters and new friends through an avenue like that. So basically, I learned how to knit when I was young, and then finally started knitting in 2006, 2007, when I found knitting friends. And that's the best thing about knitting, is to get all the new friends. I love to meet new people who knit. I love to teach people how to knit. I love it when my friends, contact me and say, I know you've been knitting for years. Would you mind teaching me? I love to do that. I love to draw people into something that I love to do. And meeting everybody, and now having the podcast and meeting everybody from online and all over the world, and it's just really a special place for me, and I just love it. And here's the second half to the question on what or how I got started knitting and spinning. And this is the spinning part. So, spinning. I said for years that I was never going to be a spinner. Probably from the moment that I started meeting friends from Ravelry and seeing people use the drop spindle and spinning on a wheel, I said, nope, not interested. Don't have any desire whatsoever to learn how to spin. And it was mostly because I like a very smooth yarn. And what I was seeing my friends create were thick and thin yarn, bulky yarn, art yarn, and whatnot. And I thought that's just what spinning was all about. I thought that that's the only kind of yarn you could make. Now, a lot of people like that kind of yarn, but that's just not for me. It's very pretty and whatnot. I just don't like to use it. I just don't like it. I like how it looks when it's knit up, but I don't like to knit with it. Anyway, so from 2007, when I started meeting people from Ravelry who were also spinners, to 2010, just before Knittopia. Was it 2010? I'll have to look that up and let you know. It was either 2010 or 2011. Hang on, I'll check the born on date for my wheel because it was born a couple months before I started to learn how to spin. So hang on just a minute. Okay, it was 2011. My wheel was actually born on my husband's birthday in 2011. So just before Knittopia in 2011, we were going through what classes we were going to have at Knittopia, and Kagi TM of the High Fiber Diet volunteered to teach a drop spindle class. And being the overachiever that I am, I felt like I had to learn how to drop spindle before I went to take Kagi's drop spindle class. Well, the thing is I needed to get fiber, I needed to get a drop spindle, I needed to have these tools ready for when I went to camp, and once I bought them, I just wanted to know how to use them. I just could not wait the 2.5 weeks till we got to camp to learn. So I took like an impromptu class at Unique Knits in Royal Oak. I just happened to be in there buying my spindle and fiber, and I just asked her to give me a quick basic class, real quick, give me the basics on how to do it. And she was just showing me maybe 15 minutes. And she said, by the way, we have a beginner drop spindle class that's tomorrow. Would you like to come to do it? And I'm like, tomorrow. And I said, sure. So I went the next day and I took a 3-hour beginner drop spindle class. And I was hooked. And I still, at that point, when we all start spinning, we still get thick and thin. And at that point, I wasn't totally sure that I was going to be able to get the type of yarn that I wanted, but I was fairly sure that it could happen. I just needed to practice. So for the next 2 weeks, I proceeded to practice leading up to Knittopia, and then I got to Knittopia. Kagi taught her drop spindle class, and I learned quite a bit from her. And then Kagi sat me down to her ladybug wheel to learn how to spin on the wheel. And when I got to Knittopia, after buying like 4 or 5 drop spindles between the 2.5 weeks before and Knittopia, because now I was completely hooked, and who knows how much fiber, probably 4 or 5 bumps of fiber, maybe more, I decided that I would be perfectly fine just spinning on a drop spindle. I didn't have to spin on a wheel. I loved spinning on the drop spindle, and I did not have to buy a wheel, and I was perfectly happy with that. I got to camp, and Kagi sat me down to the ladybug and taught me how to spin on the ladybug, and I ordered the ladybug that weekend. That first weekend, because Knittopia is a 1.5 weeks long, and I had it delivered to me from somebody stopped at the spinning loft in Howell on their way across the state to come up to Knittopia. They were coming up for the second weekend. They stopped and picked up my wheel for me and brought it to me at Knittopia. And I have been hopelessly addicted to spinning ever since. It is a slippery, slippery slope when you fall into that, but it is so much fun, and I so enjoy it, as well as enjoying the time that I spend knitting my hand spun. That's all I've got for you this week. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the show. And as always, you feel free to contact me with your comments or suggestions regarding the show, as I am always trying to improve things here on Knitting Blooms. And you can always find me on Ravelry as Bloomingknitter, and you can find me on Plurk, Twitter, Instagram as Bloomingknitter. However, I'm not on those sites as often. And you can find the blog at knittingblooms.com, and you can email me at knittingblooms@gmail.com. So thanks so much for watching. Bye for now.